This podcast is brought to you by Most Valuable Podcasts, leading the league in podcasting entertainment.
What's up, what's up? Real MVPs, Ricky Widmer here, along with the one, the only, Brandon Swanson.
Hey.
And Brandon, we got a comment about you on our Odell Beckham video on the onside kick. Apparently, people like you so much on this podcast, they were asking where you were on the onside kick because they miss you on the onside kick.
I can't imagine it's because they love me on this podcast.
And I know that it's because you were also telling me before the podcast that you were kind of upset that you couldn't be on the onside kick yesterday because all this NFL free agency news has got Brandon's brain kind of going a little crazy because it's the best time of the year. This is truly, for any sport, the best time of the year.
It is because people actually are signing places right away. They're not
like before
they're not
free
holding
started.
out and waiting till weeks into spring training already like MLB.
Not like Bryce Harper, but you've got NBA season is gearing up for the playoffs. March Madness is gearing up. The Combine and the Draft is gearing up for college football. You've got NFL free agency. This is clearly my favorite time of the year just overall for sports. And it's just when I really just kind of dive in and enjoy everything. But boy, do we have a jam-packed... I know I always say that. Like, you got a jam-packed show. So really, Ricky, what does that truly mean? But really, we're like jamming everything in. It's like you're going on that vacation, you've got everything packed, and you're like, bathing suit, forgot it. And you're like trying to jam that bathing suit in, and the suitcase is about to explode. That's this podcast, because not only do we have our NFL Big Board 4.0 today, 1 through 25, all three segments on the podcast, we also got some college basketball, because, Brandon, some big things went down yesterday, Tuesday night, that we got to talk about that could impact the NCAA tournament. And also, we got to give our official predictions for the conference tournaments, although some of them have started already. The Power 5 ones, we're going to give our predictions at the end of the segment. But before we do, make sure to check out patreon.com/Most Valuable Podcast. Those of you who are supporting us at the $10 tier can come on a podcast of your choice, talk about a topic that you want to talk about, and we all have fun. Or you can support us at any other tier level that we have. We have tons of rewards for you guys. We're actually going to be revamping those very soon and having a little video talking about that in the near future. So stay tuned for that as well. But Brandon, let's dive into some college basketball before we get into our big board. And last night we had the WCC, the West Coast Conference, had their title game for their conference tournament. And everyone thought, you know what, I ain't going to tune into this one. It's St. Mary's, the Gales, it's the Gonzaga Bulldogs, 30-2, number one team in the nation. They're so stacked, there's no way they could go down. There's no way that they could lose, right, B? No way that Gonzaga can lose. Well, the Zags lose 60-47. A team that averaged 90 points this season was held to only 47 points against the Gales. And when Coach Bennett for the Gales was asked about being on the bubble and everything, he goes, well, you know what? I feel sorry for everyone else on the bubble because we don't have to worry about it anymore because they have punched their ticket into the tournament. So many implications. There are some teams on the bubble that are like, great, since St. Mary's is in and obviously Gonzaga is still going to get into the tournament, that takes away a spot for us. But what I want to talk about to start the podcast, Brandon, is the Gonzaga Bulldogs. They were originally the number one team going into this game. They are not going to be the number one team when Selection Sunday comes up this Sunday. The question I want to ask you is what I proposed on Twitter. Joe Lenardi says this might not be the case, but I still want to have this discussion. Should or will the Gonzaga Bulldogs fall off of the one line after this loss to St. Mary's?
Well, it depends on everybody else. And where I'm looking big time right now is the Big Ten.
Well, you had responded to my tweet talking about a certain team from the Big Ten.
Because you asked a good question, and you talked about, could there be a possibility that that Duke, that Tennessee, that LSU end up jumping and being a number one and switching out with Gonzaga, I think specifically was your tweet. And out of those, my response was Michigan State to me, because as of late, I know that they had their loss to Indiana on the road, and their 3 losses in a row of Purdue, Indiana, and Illinois. That was a while back. They've done some good things since then, and their last win against Michigan was big. I think that what Michigan State would need to do is to win the Big Ten tournament. And if they could do that, I think that Michigan could help to put themselves as a really, or at least make themselves a good case for why they should be a number 1 seed. And why that they should knock off Gonzaga from being a number 1 and then put Gonzaga as a number 2. But if Michigan State is unable to win the Big Ten tournament, then I think that they would probably stay at a 2, and Gonzaga most likely would be at a 1. Tennessee and LSU, what I think I said was that they've been LSU was a little too inconsistent in my mind throughout the season. A good team, don't get me wrong, but I don't think they were consistent enough to be considered a number 1, and Tennessee faltered too much at the end of the season to be considered a number 1 in my mind.
Now, the thing that I know a lot of people are going to say, and this is probably why Joe Lunardi right away was like, hey, they're probably going to still stay on the 1 line. The good thing for Gonzaga, only 3 losses this year. Like, if Virginia doesn't win the ACC, them and Virginia will be at the same amount of losses, and that'll be the least amount of losses out of the top 25. So they have that going for them. But for me, it all comes down to the rest of the Power Fives. And the Big Ten, like you mentioned, is a big one because, yeah, Michigan State, if they go on and win that game or win that tourney, that could propel them to the 1 line. But also think about this. You've got 2 conferences in the ACC and the SEC that can kind of shake things up here, where the SEC is interesting because right now Kentucky holds that final. Like, we talked about them a couple weeks ago. Could they be on the 1 line? Well, guess what? Right now, entering Champ Week, they are that last number 1 seed, number 4, heading into this week. But let's say they lose. They're going to have to, if they want to win, they're going to have to play the winner of Alabama Ole Miss, which, unless there's a March upset, should happen in most eyes. But then it's like you got to play potentially Tennessee. If we're going just top seeds, you got to go through Tennessee in the semifinal, and then either LSU or South Carolina, most likely LSU. You got to play both of those guys going on into that final and into that championship. And then you got Duke, where Duke and Virginia could meet in the ACC final. And if Duke beats Virginia in the ACC final with a healthy Zion Williamson back playing for them, those are 2 teams that if Kentucky loses, Tennessee and LSU could steal a 1 line from them. But at the same time, if Duke beats Virginia, will that hurt the Zags, or will it hurt Virginia, who would lose to Duke, especially if Virginia loses before that championship game and wouldn't even get the opportunity to play a Duke for the ACC final?
Well, Ricky, I think when you look first at Duke, is they've been very shaky. Everyone understands and realizes they've been shaky without Zion Williamson. And everyone knows that for this tournament to be truly fun, Zion Williamson needs to be playing for the ACC tournament and then certainly for the NCAA tournament. Otherwise, 1, there won't be as much excitement. 2, Duke has really no chance of making it all the way. But they've been too inconsistent. I don't think they jump anyone to get to the 1 line. I don't see that happening. And then when you look on the other side for Tennessee or LSU being able to jump to Kentucky to be on the 1 line, I don't necessarily see either of those happening. But but out of either one of them, I would see Tennessee over LSU to have a better chance to jump the Wildcats in that scenario. But I think Kentucky probably stays at the 1. I think Virginia probably stays at the 1. Gonzaga is the one where I am like, I don't know. I don't know if they're going to be a 1 seed. North Carolina currently right now is a 1 seed with Joe Lunardi. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think they probably should be. I don't see a whole lot of mix up from 3 of the 4 1 seeds. Gonzaga is the one that I think is up for grabs right now, but that's only if in my mind, if a Michigan State is able to win the Big Ten tournament and kind of really run the table there, as they are the number one seed in that tournament. So if they're able to go through that, do everything they're supposed to do, and win it all, that's going to make a whole lot more sense than a Gonzaga team that really didn't look good, losing 60-47 to St. Mary's.
The only thing, if I am the Gonzaga Bulldogs, first off, the thing I want to say about Gonzaga, because I know their fans are going to say so, the only losses they had before this WCC finals tournament loss was a 3-point loss in December to Tennessee on a neutral court, and then they lost 103-90 at North Carolina on December 15th. Only 2 games they've lost all year. They even have on their resume a win over a number 1 Duke team in the Maui Invitational in Hawaii. So they have, to me, quality wins. And like, I know the Tennessee and North Carolina losses are, hey, you lost to some 1 and 2 seeded teams, but you have a win against Duke, and that can help you in this argument. The thing that I just popped to my head that I want to ask you is, do you think Gonzaga is more vulnerable than North Carolina? Because if North Carolina, let's say, because looking at the ACC tournament, of course, they're going to have to play their games on Thursday, North Carolina and Duke. But if North Carolina and Duke meet Friday for the semifinals and Duke beats them, and then Duke wins the ACC tournament, is North Carolina the most vulnerable, where it would be like, well, you know, Duke beat you and Duke just won their conference tournament. So instead of you and Virginia being on that one line, we're going to put Virginia and Duke on the one line, and North Carolina could be the team that falls out to the 2 line.
You know, I think that when I look at Gonzaga, and they have had a good season, as they do almost every single year, the fact that they couldn't close in the game last night is a little troubling. And I'm not saying that St. Mary's is a bad team. It's almost always Gonzaga and St. Mary's in that game. I mean, that's really no surprise.
The last time Gonzaga lost the WCC tournament was 2012.
I know.
I believe St. Mary's was the team that beat them.
So
it's always these 2 teams.
It is. It's always those 2. I mean, it's really never a surprise of which 2 it's going to be. But I will say you have to close out. I mean, you have to be able to win those games. And I'm not saying it's an easy game. It's not an easy game, and you know this team very well. So I guess I just feel like there was such a poor showing from Gonzaga in that game. And yes, they'd much rather have it now than actually in the NCAA tournament, but they're held from 2 for 17 from beyond the arc. They're not going to win going shooting like that from 3. Rui was very much held in check. If a team comes along and holds him in check in the tournament, that's going to be pretty difficult. If a team comes along and holds him and Brandon Clark in check in the tournament, that's going to be extremely difficult. But when you look at UNC, and yes, you give that scenario, then yes, we have ourselves some question marks of is North Carolina going to remain a number 1? But I will say currently, I think Duke has looked really bad. I mean, it just
depends on how they look with Zion.
Exactly. I understand you get Zion back. Cam is still trash, you know, for a good player. But he is. What does he do? Nothing.
I love the shade being thrown by you at Cam, and then the support that he gets in the comment section. It's a nice little and forth between you and the comment section. That is why I laugh when you make a comment like Cam is trash, because I know that back and forth that I love so much of just the disagreements is going to come from the comment section. It's just great to see.
Well, absolutely.
Because, of course, we're not all going to agree on everything.
And then they're going to tell me or ask me, how many Duke games do you watch per year?
Do you even watch, bro?
All the Duke games that are in primetime.
Mm-hmm.
So,
every
there
single
you go.
Duke
So
game.
there you go.
They're always in primetime.
Pretty much. But I think that RJ Barrett, too, he has, especially right now, the weight on his shoulders, it's the whole weight of the team. It's all on him right now.
Let's go and put that
that's,
back on Zion's sturdy shoulders.
Well, at least split it. At least split it, which is where it seemed to be before, and it seemed to be working. My problem though is Cam is one of those players where he just disappears in these games. I think a lot of times, and that's his problem and that's where we talk about in a big board. That's where I would think someone would be talking about should be talking about in a mock draft. Is he going to be able to be that number one playmaker at the next level? And if the answer is no, then I guess I would think maybe he shouldn't be as high in mock drafts, which is why and is high in big boards, which is why I've dropped him down. But it's going to be very interesting to see what this Duke team is going to be like with Zion Williamson returning. If he is fully healthy, what's he going to look like after 5-6 games off? Probably his same self. Awesome. But
well, hey, there's even articles I've seen can he get into game shape? Like, can he get back into game shape after missing so many games since being out since the UNC game, the first UNC game?
And it's not easy. It's not easy to get back to that point and just come back and be the guy right away. And if he's able to, that even speaks volumes for him at the next level of what he will be able to be. So I'm interested. I definitely don't want to put North Carolina at a 2 right now already, assuming that Duke's going to get there and swap them for a number 1. But I guess you could put an asterisk there.
It's for me, that is how all this is playing out, because the 1 seeds are very fluid right now, I would say, where I feel like, first off, I'll start from the bottom, because that's how we start from the bottom. Now we're here. Let's start with the SEC, where it's if Kentucky doesn't win that tournament, and let's say LSU does, I could maybe see then, maybe not in LSU, because LSU's at 9, but then it's like, okay, Michigan State won the Big Ten. Will Michigan State then take the 1 seed away from a Kentucky? If North Carolina wants to be a 1 seed, they need to advance to the final at the very least. And in that final, they can only lose to Virginia, because then they could say, well, it was a 1v1, we lost, especially if they beat Duke. If they beat Duke, solidify it. You're a number 1 seed if you're North Carolina. If you lose to Duke in the semifinals, barring if Duke gets there, because anything can happen, if you lose to Duke, then I'm sitting there going, okay, I am ready to be a 2 seed if I'm North Carolina. The thing that I feel like Virginia and Gonzaga, after, because I know my tweet that I sent out after the WCC game kind of made it seem like I was expecting Gonzaga to fall off the 1 line. But the more I think about it, I think Gonzaga's done enough this year. Their conference play, you can believe whatever you want in it. The point I always make is you can only play in conference. You can only play the games that are on your schedule. You can't change those games. So it's not like Gonzaga could change anything. They played the games that were on their conference schedule, and they only lost 1 of them. But the question that I want to ask you, particularly about Gonzaga, let's say they do, whether they stay a 1 line or they go to the 2 line, did this game, St. Mary's, because Coach Bennett of the Gales, after this win, said 2 things that popped out to me. Number 1, he said kind of like what you said. The Bulldogs aren't going to shoot like this every game. Like, you look at it, Zach Norvell Jr. was 1 of 11, 0 of 6 from 3. He's not going to shoot like that normally. Perkins, 0 of 3 from beyond the arc. You've got the whole team, 2 of 17 from beyond the arc. Whether it was a bad shooting day for the Zags, good defense from St. Mary's, it goes a little bit hand in hand there, because St. Mary's did play very well defensively to keep this team only at 47 points. The question I want to ask you is, did St. Mary's, because they feel like Coach Bennett said, he's like, hey, the last game that we played against them, I believe it was at St. Mary's place, he said, I felt like we played very well defensively against them. It was just one transitional run, which Gonzaga very good in transition. They can kind of get things started with that. It took one run. It was like, great. Without that one run, we probably could have beat them today. Did St. Mary's just give teams, any team, any seed, a blueprint to where if we want to knock off Gonzaga in the tournament, watch this game and try to emulate what St. Mary's did?
I mean, I think that there's going to be probably plenty of teams who will go back and look at that film. But again, it's two factors. Mm-hmm. Yes, St. Mary's came and they played good defense, but also Gonzaga just had a really bad shooting night.
Just an off night.
And I think that's also one of the problems is you look at that and you can't just say, oh, well, here's the blueprint. This is exactly what we have to do, because if Rui's on, if Brandon Clark is on, if these guys are on and just nailing their threes, no matter how good the defense is, it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. I mean, you want to try and slow them up as much as you can, but it doesn't necessarily matter in the end if they're on, if they're having a good shooting night. But yes, it will still be a game that teams will want to look at and say, okay, how exactly did they do it, and how can we try and emulate it?
So here's what I want to do to end this before we go into the meat and potatoes, which is the big board. I just want to really quickly, I know some of these have started and it's not a true kind of prediction, but with the weekend coming to a close and Champ Week kind of already here, I want to just very quickly, just for the Power 5, so Big 10, ACC, Big 12, SEC, and then Pac-12. Basically, all I'm going to say is you don't have to give every single game because that would be way too long. Who's in the final? Who wins it? So we'll start with the Big 10 because that's the one, Brandon, I know that you kind of seem like you're most excited for the Big 10 tournament. Who's in the final on March 17th, Selection Sunday, and who wins the Big 10 tournament?
I'm going to say Michigan State and Purdue. Michigan State wins.
See, I'm going to go opposite of you. I'm going to say Michigan State wins it. They beat Michigan for the title. I think that it's going to be Michigan-Purdue in that second game. Michigan will win, and then it'll be a good game, Michigan State-Michigan. I almost wanted to pick the Wolverines, but I'm going to pick Sparty to win that game. ACC, who's in the final and who wins it?
Come back to me.
So I'll start. So for me, I'm going to go boring. You ready for this boring pick? Duke versus Virginia. Duke wins. It's plain and simple. I've said this before. I will say it again. Duke, as long as they have Zion Williamson on the court, they are my national championship pick. If he is not on the court, they are not my national championship pick because they are two vastly different teams when Zion is on the court versus when Zion is off the court, where you look at every game before Zion got injured, they lost to a Syracuse team by 4 and a Gonzaga team by 2. As soon as Zion left that team, they lost to UNC, they lost to Virginia Tech, they lost to UNC. They almost lost to Wake Forest, only won that game by 1. That's another negative on there. So almost 4 losses without Zion out there. As long as Zion is playing for the Duke Blue Devils, I think they will win most of their games and win it all. So I'm going to pick Duke over Virginia in the ACC title game.
I'm going to say that I'm going to go with something that most people are not going to find very appealing, and I'm going with it just because of that exact fact. Syracuse is going to knock off Duke, and then it's going to end up being Virginia and North Carolina. Virginia will win.
Wait, so you say Virginia over who?
North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Because Duke, I have Duke losing to Syracuse.
Okay. So you got
because
Duke
Syracuse,
losing.
that defense, they've struggled against it before. Syracuse has played them well. I'm gonna say that Syracuse upsets Duke, and then it's gonna be North Carolina and Syracuse. North Carolina will get past them. Virginia will beat North Carolina.
See, and that can totally happen because when did Syracuse beat Duke? When Zion was on the floor. It was funny because when Syracuse beat Duke, RJ and Zion were on the floor. It was Cam Reddish who was not on the floor. So I will ask you, which one do you want to go to next? SEC, Big 12, or Pac-12?
Let's do SEC.
SEC, who are you picking for your final game and who's winning it?
I'm going to do Kentucky over LSU, and I am going Kentucky. That's who I'm going to go with there.
So see, I'm a little conflicted with this one, and the reason why is I like two teams to win this tournament, and the thing is they both play each other potentially in the semifinal round. Oh shoot, I gotta pick one of them. Who's been hotter as of late? Oh shoot. I am going to go with I'm going to go Tennessee versus LSU. Tennessee gets their revenge for the overtime loss. I believe it was 1 or 2 points that they lost by. So Tennessee playing LSU for the title. However, I will throw out there Auburn could be a sleeper, could get by South Carolina, and then against LSU, anything is possible. But Tennessee, LSU with the win. Because I know your feelings about the Pac-12, let's go over to the Big 12. We'll leave the best conference for last, right, Brandon?
Yeah.
That big old Pac-12. For me, the Big 12 tournament, you're mostly excited about the Big 10. I'm mostly excited about the Big 12. And the reason why is I think this year it's a 3-dog race for that championship. For the first time in as many years as I can remember, Kansas, sorry, Pat, one of our loyal patrons, who's a Rock Chalk Jayhawk fan, did not win the regular season crown and that automatic bid that comes with that. I think that this tournament is going to come down to 2 teams. The first one, Kansas State, the Thundercats, and Bruce Weber. On the other side, Jarrett Culver and the Texas Tech Red Raiders. And I think that Jarrett Culver, much like a young Michael Crabtree, is going to pull free, and the Big 12 tournament is going to go to the Red Raiders. How about you?
So this used to be an easy Kansas walk in the park. Well, no more this year.
No.
I'm going to say it's going to be K-State and Texas Tech in the final, and K-State is going to win.
And then we save the best for last. Pac-12. Who do you got?
Do I have to pick anybody?
Is Brandon just flipping a coin here?
I mean, like, do I have to pick anyone? And I'm very, very serious about that. So let's go with Washington and Utah, and then Washington wins.
I actually am very interested in, I believe that game happens the day that this podcast is going to come out. So the Thursday game between USC and Washington. The reason why I say that is I feel like whichever team wins that game is going to go on and win the Pac-12 tournament. I do not think that the Trojans get the win over the Huskies. I'm going to say the Huskies go ahead and get that win. And I'm actually going to be very boring for this one, too. I feel like it's going to be Washington. I feel like it's going to be ASU when everything is all said and done on Saturday. And I think this is one where the number 1 seeded team kind of walks into this with Washington winning the Pac-12 tournament and getting that automatic bid for the conference after or going into Selection Sunday.
I really hate to say this, but I almost forgot that the Pac-12 existed in college basketball this year.
Well, I mean, it had the thing with the Pac-12. For me, it had so much at the beginning of the year. It had so much like potential to be a sleeper conference because we had Ball. I hope I said that right. I keep saying Ball in Oregon. Kevin Porter Jr. with the Trojans in Southern Cal. Lugenz Dort earlier in the year with Arizona State. And then KZ Okpala with Stanford. And I feel like Dort's fallen off since like our first big boards and our first drafts. KZ Okpala has kind of stayed in like the lower range of the first round and hasn't really risen to like lottery level to where there's much hype around him. Kevin Porter Jr. obviously had he got injured, then he got suspended from the team indefinitely, and there was like so much circling around him. And then obviously Ball with his injury. I just feel like all the wind, like the potential for the Pac-12 was to be that like sleeper conference. It's like, holy shit, I didn't understand that the Pac-12 was actually this exciting, and then all their wind just got taken right out of their sails. But any final thoughts about college basketball before we will see everybody this upcoming Monday when we talk about the tournament after it's all said and done?
No.
This is where you guys comment. Let us know what you think down below in the comment section. We had a nice long discussion on college basketball. What do you think the Gonzaga loss means for the tournament? What do you think? I know we didn't hit this. What do you think the St. Mary's win means for the on-the-bubble teams? I know we didn't really hit that, but I want to know what you guys are thinking down below. And then also, give us your tournament predictions. I know it's in the middle of Champ Week, but go ahead. Give them your predictions as well down below in that comment section.